Turkey, or officially for the past few years, the Republic of Turkey, is a NATO ally, though hardly a reliable one. Under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, it has developed close relations with Vladimir Putin's Russia, now waging war against Ukraine, as well as with China, which is persecuting the Uyghurs, the Muslim people of East Turkestan, a territory the Chinese call Xinjiang, Mandarin for New Frontier. By the way, in both cases, Russia and China, you see actual examples of imperialism and settler colonialism. How many Harvard undergraduates are protesting that? How many do you think even know that? Erdogan recently praised Hamas as the first line of defense of Anatolia, Anatolia being the peninsula that constitutes most of Turkey. Erdogan further charged that if Israel is not stopped, this rogue and terrorist state will set its sights on Anatolia sooner or later. I've never heard any Israeli, no matter how hawkish, talk about conquering Anatolia or its major city, Istanbul, which, by the way, used to be called, raise your hand if you know, Constantinople. It was the Byzantine Christian capital until it was conquered by Sultan Mehmed II in, again, raise your hand if you know, 1453. You should also know that it was only in the 11th century that Turks from Central Asia invaded and settled in Anatolia, beginning the transformation of the region from Greek and Christian to Turkish and Muslim. Again, how many students at Harvard would know any of this, do you think? Erdogan is often described as a Neo-Ottoman, a reference to the empire that, based in Anatolia, ruled much of the Middle East for centuries. In the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire allied with Germany, and both were defeated in World War I. Many of the nations of the modern Middle East, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, and Israel among them, were either carved from or emerged from Ottoman possessions. To discuss what Turkey under Erdogan has become and where it may be going, we're joined by Sinan Ciddi, non-resident senior fellow at FDD, John Schanzer, FDD's senior vice president for research, and Tyler Stapleton, director of congressional relations at FDD Action. I'm Cliff May, and I'm glad you're along for the ride here on Foreign Policy. John, Tyler, Sinan, good to see you guys.
Hey, Cliff.
Hey, Cliff.
I got one more thing I got to say. Years ago, Mark Dubowitz and I, FDD's Mark Dubowitz and I, we were in Turkey, in Istanbul, great city, marvelous city, and this was still a time when it was perfectly okay to be a Kemalist and to be a secularist. You know,
it's still perfectly okay, by
is
the way.
it?
It should be.
It
is in my book.
The secularists I know. Well, you do talk about this, you don't talk about this. I mean, there was a university there that Mark and I spoke at, and it was very determinedly secularist and Kemalist. Try to remember the name of it.
Bahçeşehir.
Bahçeşehir.
Oh, you guys were there?
We're
Okay.
in Bahçeşehir. Now, but I don't think it's determinedly secularist and Kemalist anymore, is it?
Well, rather than that, its owner and president is very pro-Erdogan. He's cozied up quite close to him, but he was always a sort of a wheeler and dealer type of personality. But it's interesting, yeah. But I don't think he's at his core. I don't think he's anywhere close to Islamism as Erdogan is, but. Hey, he's following the money and where opportunity and where survival stands, so that's why he's probably sort of moved much closer to it.
Well, when you think of this, well, I also remember seeing in Istanbul women in hijab and women almost right next to them in belly-bearing crop tops, and I remember thinking, okay, you can do that in Washington, you can do that in New York, you can do that in Tel Aviv. Is this sustainable in Istanbul? Now, I haven't been back to Istanbul. Neither of you. We don't. I mean, we think it's dangerous for FDD to go there. Do you still see that on the street?
I think it's actually increased. Even conservative women and their children. Since you've been there, and since I've sort of last been there, if anything is the failing of Erdogan in the long term, it's what he's called himself said. It's the cultural realm. He has not been able to convince.
So you'll see more women in crop tops than you.
It's not more. You'll see them, coexist and. You've never needed the state's arm to say, what is the right way of decorum? How should you dress? How should you comport yourself in public life? Students and young people have kind of figured out, you don't need to officially ban the hijab. You don't need to do this. People have just figured out, hey, you do you and I'll do my way, but it doesn't mean we can't be friends. And for decades, the Turkish state has essentially tried to sort of regulate how people should dress, what they should eat, what they should drink, what their beliefs should be. And this is Erdogan's biggest worry going forward, I think, that, in his post-Erdogan era, whenever he's out of the picture, I think Turkey's long-term prospects are that what he wants to instill in the sort of Islamist fashion is not going to take root.
And well, maybe just talk a little bit. What do you what does he want to instill? I mean, in the Kemalist times, the idea was you shouldn't be identifiable religiously in the public square. You shouldn't do all that. My guess is that, I mean, his wife is covered, yes. And the ambassador here in Washington is a lovely guy, very bright guy, but his wife covers. So I've met with him. How does Erdogan see it?
I mean, he would like to instill what he's called a pious generation. He would like a much more sort of conservative outlook on life. But willing that and wanting that to happen is not necessarily the same as actually seeing that in reality, simply because that's not what people want. And I was born into a secular Turkish family. You know, our sort of level of faith is pretty sort of slim, probably close to half of what the country is, right? But as far as Erdogan is going to fail in sort of raising a more pious generation that's close to his Islamist authoritarian worldview, the Kemalist sort of mindset had its own sort of limitations in the sense that they couldn't instill an a-religious society. And what we're seeing, I think, even despite Erdogan for the last 20 years, is a society which is emerging that is, hey, live and let live. Let's focus on the actual issues of, where Turkey should be in the world, where it should stand. Even the most Islamist sort of and conservative families that you see in Turkey, their children don't want to sort of send their kids to, religious schools or whatever. They want to send them to schools in, like Bahçeşehir or other private universities in Turkey. Or if they don't want that, they can send them over. They send them overseas. They send them to European schools, American schools, and they want them to have prosperous, affluent lives. They don't want to have nobody in, as far as I can see in Turkey, really wants to sort of instill a very conservative, pious society. And as much as Erdogan wants it, he's not going to get it.
The other thing Erdogan wants, it seems to me, John, is I mentioned that he was a Neo-Ottoman and maybe a Neo-Sultan. I mean, he has an enormous palace. And if you're a Neo-Ottoman, that's a counter-revolution against Kemalism. Because after what did Kemal want? He wanted modern Turkey, emerging from the ashes of the defeated Ottoman Empire, to be a nation-state in the European style. But if you're a Neo-Sultan and a Neo-Ottoman, you want to extend the power to other countries. I mean, if you're going to look for where Turkish imperialism is taking place now, I think it's in Syria, isn't it?
It's in Syria, but it's also in Gaza. It's in the West Bank. They have their eyes on Jerusalem. We actually see there's an NGO called Kutad that is very active in Jerusalem right now. We've actually seen reports that they've been trying to buy up property, that they're bringing Turkish tourists. You may recall, actually, there was a Turkish tourist that stabbed an Israeli border guard not too long ago, where people are radicalized and being indoctrinated with this idea of expanding Turkish influence into the Levant. And it's actually really remarkable to see, but we even see it beyond there as well. We can see it in places like the Balkans, where Turkish influence can be seen. You can see it even in Germany right now.
And the Balkans used to be under the Ottomans, just so people know. A lot of the Balkans.
Absolutely. But you can see that they have designs on influence, maybe not conquest quite yet, but it's more of a soft power that might be converted into something in the longer term. It's an overreach, though, in my view, because the country itself is failing economically. Politically, you can see that it's quite brittle. That internally, right? I mean, Erdogan just suffered a major loss at the polls at home, at the municipal elections, at the municipal level. So the idea that somehow you can extend power outside of your borders while you're struggling just to maintain the same level of control inside your borders strikes me as fanciful, but you can definitely get a sense of what that foreign ambition looks like for Erdogan.
And anybody on this, what do you make of Erdogan saying, the Israelis want to conquer Turkey, want to conquer Anatolia, which is most of Turkey, except for the little European portion on the other side of the...
Yeah, I mean, you can always be shocked but not surprised at what comes out of Erdogan's mouth, right? And we certainly have seen it over the last, several years. But, October 7 was a watershed. But that one actually surprised me because I've never heard it from him before. I don't take it seriously in terms of content. I don't think he actually he believes that the Israelis have desires on Turkish soil.
They kind of got their hands full right now. The
but it's part of Erdogan's sort of look. Like John just said, he just got a drubbing at the local elections, and yes, Erdogan is severely politically weakened. The economy is just a shamble. It's just a dumpster fire. But in order to sort of woo voters and say, hey, well, give them a reason to continue, cheering for Erdogan or going to the polls for him. He's got to have something to sell to them, and it's not the economy. What it is like this sort of nutso stuff on Israel and Gaza. So if you look at anything that's sort of public election rallies since October 7, right, in Turkey, in the lead up to these local elections, every election rally that I've watched, whether it was Erdogan's headlining or other sort of potential sort of local governments, leaders vying for office, if the first 10 sentences or 10 minutes of a campaign rally wasn't opening with, death to Israel and, damn be to Zionists, right? Then it would be surprising. And so that was the final comment that I saw was the Israelis are coming after our soil. It's this sort of narrative, let's keep people on their toes. And but that anti-Israeli stuff wasn't enough for him to get reelected. People just weren't buying it.
When you say he got a drubbing, but we both met, which parties and what do they represent that did the drubbing? What's the alternative?
The main opposition, broadly speaking, the Ataturk's party itself had got its highest level of the vote share since 1977, and it really flipped the electoral map. And our listeners might not think that local elections matter because Erdogan was reelected as president last year. I would say that's quite the opposite. Yes, he is president, but he's looking weaker and weaker. Local government matters because that's the spoils distribution. AKP does not hold on to the vast majority of Turkey's big cities. And those are important because that's how Erdogan curries favor with big business, with, oligarchs, with apparatchiks, to give them building permits and, land and building permission and zoning and, all the sort of cronyistic, nepotistic stuff goes on at the local level. Well, he's lost more of that than he's held on to. And so if he cannot distribute money and spoils, why should, the circles that keep him in power stay loyal to him? I don't think he has an answer to that.
And just so I understand, the parties that opposed him and did well are more secularist, more Kemalist, less Ottoman, less imperialist. Is that
the biggest one? Is the biggest one that swept the floor? Is yes.
And Tyler, I'm curious, what kind of support does Turkey have in Congress? Is there a Turkey caucus that's sort of pro-Erdogan or anti-Erdogan? Where is that?
So I will say that there is a Turkey caucus. It has been, it originally was designed to be a pro-Turkey place where legislators could come to write legislation and do letters in support of what Turkey was doing. It has transitioned to a number of members of Congress that are very skeptical of Erdogan. It has morphed that caucus and some of the other caucuses that cover other regional actors are very skeptical of Erdogan and very much active in his opposing his comments on Hamas.
So is it like an anti-Turkey caucus now?
No, there isn't. But there are a number of other regional caucuses that focus on the U.S. relationship with Israel, with Greece, with Cyprus. And focus on general security for the Eastern Mediterranean that I would say have a anti-Erdogan bent, not an anti-Turkey bent, but anti-Erdogan bent.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, the largest minority in Turkey are the Kurds, and the Kurds, the Kurds have certainly felt oppressed. That Erdogan wants them to simply accept the identity of being Turkish and not have Turkish language, Kurdish language, Kurdish culture, all of that. Is there any kind of caucus in Congress that supports the Kurds?
There's the Kurdish caucus. I think that on that is a lot of members of Congress that are linked with immigration, with Kurdish folks that have come to the United States and set up communities in their congressional districts. So a lot of the membership is based on having constituents that support those things. I think with Congress, though, there are different factions. I think there are those that are concerned more on the foreign policy side that are concerned with Erdogan's activities, anti-Israel activities, and pro-Hamas activities. And then there are the members more on the armed services, DOD front, that support the military-to-military relationship that DoD has with Turkey within the NATO relationship. It's a little problematic. I think the Department of Defense is a little close with Turkey. I think it's a product of both the NATO equities that they have, but also military sales that have been going on between the United States and Turkey. The F-16 sales that were just approved by the Turkish government for $23 billion that are going to be delivered. They were kicked out of the F-35 program for a lot of the interactions they had with purchasing Russian military equipment. Congress had a say on that with the CATSA Act that imposed sanctions. So I think at this point, there's a number of different equities. I know that DoD is also concerned with Turkey's role in supplying explosives that are used in manufacturing 155 millimeter rounds. It's part of the supply chain that supports NATO, supports supplying weapons to Ukraine, supports some of the manufacturing base that goes into shells going to Israel. So there are a number of different factions, I would say, within Congress that have different views of Turkey as a stabilizing force or as a spoiler. And again, I think a lot of the interaction going on right now, actually, even today on the House floor with the National Defense Authorization Act, focuses on what Turkey's role is moving forward. Some of the studies that were proposed would question whether Turkey should still be in NATO, whether they're material breach of the NATO treaty. Some of the other amendments that are proposed to the Defense Authorization Act would also require studies that would go into whether Turkey is providing material support to terrorist groups in their territory, which would include Turkey, but also some of the activities in northern Cyprus. So there are plenty of folks that want to check what Erdogan's doing in Congress. There are plenty of others that really want to continue the relationship that's going on and the support for NATO.
Yeah, John, there's an upcoming NATO summit. You might want to give your thoughts on what should be demanded. I'm not sure what will be demanded of Ankara.
The problem, obviously, we all know is that, we've long joked that, NATO is the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can't leave. There is no way.
Well, seriously, there's no way to expel
mechanism.
Somebody, even if you want to. And there's a question, because I've heard people say, look, I don't like Erdogan either, but if we expel him, that we're just pushing him into Putin's arms and China's arms.
So he's outside of the tent peeing into it as opposed to the other way around.
Right.
We've heard all of these things for quite some time. But I want to just kind of piggyback off of something that Tyler was saying. Turkey is I think a case study in the mismanagement of American alliances. Out of, I think, a gaggle of them that we can see really right now on full display. We saw FDD started tracking basically as early as 2010, 2011, that Turkey was veering in the wrong direction. And we saw them working with the Iranians and helping them evade sanctions. And we watched them supporting Hamas, and we watched them supporting ISIS. And flirting with the Chinese, working with the Russians. We could see this. It was all in plain sight. And we didn't make demands. We did not hold the line at any one of those points. And the Turks just kept drifting and drifting and drifting under Erdogan. He became more authoritarian. The rights of everyday citizens were getting crushed. The aftermath of the attempted coup led to just disastrous consequences domestically. It no longer qualifies as a bona fide ally of the United States, but that was just one of many. We could look at the Qataris having done the same thing. We could look at the Omanis having done the same thing. We have forgotten what it means to be the lead partner in alliances. And I think Turkey is the one that we're watching probably the most poignantly right now begin to unravel. But I think that what happens in Turkey doesn't stay in Turkey. I think we're going to see a trend of other countries that should have been within the alliance in NATO or within other alliance structures stray. And there needs to be, I actually think that Turkey is one of these case studies where if the US came in and actually started enforcing and saying, look, these are our demands of you if you want to stay an ally of ours, you could begin to reverse the tide. People are looking at Turkey now as an example of what you can get away with as an American ally, and that's highly problematic.
Yeah, well, and you're right, and Qatar is another example of that, and Oman is another example of that, because we only seem to use carrots and not sticks.
Correct.
Yeah, and by the way, we should point out that Turkey militarily is it has the strongest military in NATO aside from the U.S. Am I
the largest? I don't know if it's the strongest, right?
Yeah, true. But I don't know if they were put up against Germany or Netherlands, how that would work out.
It's a mostly conscription force, so you have a lot of folks that you could mobilize, but whether they have the same type of capabilities that Germany would have or others, I think they're somewhat lacking. But they can throw numbers at a problem pretty easily.
The thing that I always ask is okay, you've got this large force, and it's designed to do one thing within NATO, which would be to counter Russia. And this is a country that's not ever going to counter Russia.
Well, I mean, this thought experiment, Putin successfully takes Ukraine and then decides to take Lithuania, which is a NATO member. Turkey comes to fight Russia over Lithuania. Do we expect to see that? And
not even close. But you got to remember, these guys took the S-400 from the Russians.
Yeah,
and they haven't given it back.
Tell people what S-400
this is their advanced air defense system. And
right.
Deploying it anywhere near American hardware poses a crazy cyber threat to the United States, long term, short term. It's a disaster, right? But, this is not a country that's going to go lock horns with the Russians. Let's just be clear.
Yeah, I would say even with the conflict in Ukraine, Turkey's playing both sides. I mean, they're providing drones to the Ukrainians, including a manufacturing place, but they're also allowing drone parts to find their way into Iranian drones and Chinese drones that are being used by the Russians against the Ukrainians. And so just yesterday, you saw the Treasury Department come out with sanctions on Russian banks to go after Putin's wartime economy. Surprise, surprise, there's a lot of Turkish manufacturing groups in there and individuals that are on that list for secondary sanctions, just showing you how close that relationship still is between Turkey and Russia, regardless of what they're saying about supporting the Ukrainians.
And we know that there's a lot of Black Sea smuggling, where oligarchs have moved money out of Russia into Turkey. I was just recently in Cyprus, and they were talking about northern Cyprus as this jurisdiction of illicit finance that has just been absolutely.
Let's just make clear to people we're talking about here that Cyprus, the northern part of Cyprus is occupied by Turkey, and when I say occupied, they've taken it, they're holding it. It's run by Turkey, right? That's what we're talking about.
Correct. This is not a disputed territory. This is an occupied territory. Which is ironic, of course, given Erdogan's rhetoric as it relates to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, et cetera. I mean, but yeah, they what everybody has noted, the U.S. folks that I talked to, the Brits, the Cypriots themselves, the Greeks, they're all saying the same thing, that they're watching a massive amount of illicit financial activity. Because it's kind of a gray zone, right? It's an area of let's just say unclear central authority in some ways, and the Turkish dominated government there kind of turns a blind eye to anything that might bring in money. And so you see Russians running around there, you see Iranians running around there.
You've been to the Turkish side of Cyprus?
Oh no, I've been told not to cross over.
Not to cross over. Okay.
Yes, that they
you can cross over.
You can easily do it if you are not
thousands of workers that come back and forth every day. But again,
this is how, by the way, they're getting into the EU, right? When they cross into the south, then through the Schengen process, I guess they're able to do it. I think they're part of the Schengen visa process.
Exactly.
And Schengen means it's the agreement where if you're in one European country, you can go to another one very easily.
Right.
I mean, that's
correct.
But I think just picking up something what John initially said, but you guys have sort of reflected upon. I think there's a wider sort of implication to this notion of drift of Turkey, and it's especially what I've seen in the post-October 7 space is this sort of view out there saying, I've engaged a number of people who say to me, well, what did you expect of Turkey, in terms of Russia or the Gaza, right? I mean, Turkey is a Muslim majority country. Of course, it's sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and it believes that Israel is a brutish sort of actor. And as far as the Russians are concerned, a similar story goes like, well, of course, Turkey can't impose NATO sanctions on Russia because it would be so detrimentally hurt by a Russian response. And I was like, I understand all of that. But name me one other regional country that's a part of NATO that follows Turkey's track, and the answer is nobody. If you look across NATO members, right, not every member of NATO classifies Hamas as a terrorist organization. That's fine. Maybe that's not the standard. But I don't know any member country inside of NATO that goes out of its way, not to just sort of like, pat Hamas on the head, but actually really like go to bat for it. I mean, we've spent an inordinate amount of time since October 7th just situating how deeply rooted Hamas is inside of Turkey as an entity. And with the Russians, Tyler hit it on the head. I mean, it's not that, things are slipping through the sanctions nets, like, illicit trade, like John mentioned, Black Sea smuggling, or, Turkish entities that are selling dual-use goods that powers the Russian military-industrial base. It's that it's going on widespread. It's at a very high level. Erdogan's or the government's position that, Turkey is selling drones to the Ukrainians. Well, of course it's selling. They're making money out of it. And they're making tons more money out of selling munitions, capabilities, weapons that the Russians absolutely need to continue waging their illegal war against Ukraine. So we should just be cognizant of just how widespread this drift of Turkey is inside of NATO. And, John's asked this question. I've asked this question. I don't have an answer for it. Why is there nobody like screaming from the rafters saying, this is not okay? This is beyond normal. Are you kidding me?
Who would scream that?
Well, the good question is, so the answer to that is, every member of NATO which considers Hamas a terrorist organization, right? Every member of NATO that is part of the sanctions regime against Russia can say to Turkey, hey, this is not acceptable. And nobody's doing it.
Well, I mean, the Germans and others are sort of afraid of Turkey because they don't want, for example, Syrian refugees pouring in additionally into Europe. I mean, he kind of holds them at abeyance through that, doesn't he? That kind of threat.
Right. So he's got Europe over a barrel over that one, but he's also got, NATO is now exposed because Erdogan is backing Al-Qaeda and probably ISIS-affiliated groups inside of northern Syria, which the Turkish military pays, supports, and equips as a counterbalance, presumably at this point, against Syrian Kurds, establishing some sort of autonomy there. This is we like saying this as a hashtag on a number of our posts. This is our NATO ally, affiliated with Al-Qaeda groups inside of northern Syria, who presumably have access to Turkey, and if they get into Europe, I mean. So it's not just refugees that Europe is Syrian refugees, but what about radical extremist organizations affiliated and Turkish-backed entities that presumably have access to Turkey traveling to Europe or even possibly as far as the United States? What are we doing about that? Nothing.
Another aspect of this we should just mention is the ethnic, and that is if you're a neo-Ottoman, which means you want to dominate the Middle East again, as the Ottoman Empire did for hundreds of years. Most of the states you're talking about dominating are Arab. Turks are not Arabs. So how do you do that? Well, by being more Muslim and by being more pro-Palestinian and more anti-Israel than anybody else, which is also how the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is Persian, not Arab, not Turkish, predominantly, they say, okay, we want to dominate I would say not just the Middle East, but the Muslim world. We're Shia, we're Persian. How do we do that? We have to do it by being very Islamist and by being very anti-Israel and by supporting anyone, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, which really is a total proxy of Tehran. We have to support all of them, and then people will rally around us despite the fact we're Shia and Persian or that we're Turkish.
Right. So, but here's how it backfires, though. And I think we need to start to kind of unpack this. We know for sure that the Erdogan government has gone all in on Hamas. And we know that because there's a major Hamas headquarters that's been in Istanbul since the Gilad Shalit prisoner swap, which was 2011. And since that time, we've seen dozens of high-level officials, including military commanders. The name Salah Arori, for those who are familiar, he was really the guy who sparked the 2014 war between Israel and Hamas. He was, by the way, killed in Lebanon on January 2nd.
And Gilad Shalit, that was an Israeli who was taken a prisoner by
Hamas in 2006.
And 1,000 Hamas prisoners were released in exchange for him. People are now thinking whether that was smart. And one of those prisoners, of course, was Yahya Sinwar.
Correct. The leader of
leader
Hamas
of
today.
Hamas in Gaza now.
The one who sparked this war. But what we're looking at is eventually when Hamas is destroyed, and I think we can say with some certainty that at some point Hamas will be fully dismantled in the Gaza Strip.
You think so?
I do think so.
I'm less confident.
I still think the Israelis have been sitting on the 5-yard line for the last 3 months.
I know, but with a I don't know, a tight end tackling their feet. I don't know. Football metaphor is not good.
Yeah,
right.
Football.
Okay, well, all right. Maybe I can talk about this with Tyler later.
Yeah, right. But, we're bad on this.
Right. But so you have, I think, the likelihood anyway that Turkey is going to become ground zero for Hamas, and if they are the number one external headquarters or even just headquarters for Hamas in the future, that will not work well in terms of access to financial markets and things like that. Now, on top of that, we have seen the Turks decide to wage an economic war against Israel. They've actually announced that they're going to ban exports and imports from Israel. Total trade between those two countries is somewhere around, I think, $6 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And 3/4 of that are Turkish exports to Israel. So they're basically saying we're no longer going to export things to Israel, and they're cutting off their nose to spite their face. They're going to lose.
That's Tyler's title. That's the title of our piece that we wrote.
Okay, there you go. And then I think on top of that, then there's the relationship that is starting to unravel with the United States, where Turkey was trying to send another flotilla. You remember there was one, when was it?
2010.
2010. That was actually the first time that Turkey got on my radar because they were engaging in very overtly pro-Hamas activities. And so they were going to send another flotilla. They were threatened in unspecified ways by the United States and perhaps by some of their insurance carriers, from what we understand as well. And so they stood down, but not before the United States apparently canceled Erdogan's visit to the White House. So you're seeing now tensions with the U.S., you're seeing potential problems with financial markets, you're seeing a trade war that is going to hurt them in the long term. Whatever they think they're doing in terms of trying to rally Arab support or to appeal to the broader Middle East, this doesn't look like a particularly well thought out strategy. To me, it looks actually harmful to the Turkish people and to the Turkish government.
I would argue that Turkey is trying to normalize Hamas on the international stage in a way that other countries are not doing. I mean, Qatar is hosting them, but no one is a bigger cheerleader of Hamas than Erdogan. He met with Hania, invited him to Istanbul. He invited him to meet with other...
one of the Doha-based leaders of Hamas.
Right.
But who has Turkish citizenship and passport carrying.
He does have.
Okay. He met in Istanbul with other regional ambassadors that were there. Hania and Fidan were just meeting.
The Turkish foreign minister. Yep, just 2 days ago.
Just at the Turkey GCC meeting, as though he was a defense minister. They are elevating Hamas leadership on the international stage in ways other countries are not.
Well, this is a bit of a digression, but I want your thought on this, John. I have the sense that the Biden administration is normalizing Hamas. When you have members of the Biden administration, like Samantha Power, others saying, Hamas, this is a reasonable deal. You should consider it. Don't you think, for humanitarian reasons? I mean, you're reaching out to a terrorist organization very much as though that's a normal thing to do. I know it's not being done man to man or woman to. It's being done indirectly, but it's being done. Am I wrong? Am I overplaying?
No. I think you're not wrong. But I mean, look. First of all, there were reports just a couple of days ago that the U.S. was considering a side deal with Hamas that would see the release of 5 Americans being held for the last 8 months, and that the U.S. was actually engaging with Hamas. This was like NBC reporting. Mm-hmm. So this is not some kind of, random outlet.
The American hostages would go, but the Israeli hostages would wave bye-bye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which, by the way, doesn't send a great message. But I think, look, the Israelis would have probably been open to it. The Israeli public would have been open to this. But that would, to me, signify that the U.S. is negotiating directly with Hamas, or even indirectly, probably in Qatar.
Well, yeah.
And that's, of course,
Egypt,
that's why they have their office there, is so that Western countries can engage. That's That was an Obama era invention. Then I think, you get to your broader point, which is the U.S. continues to propose plans for a ceasefire that would ultimately see the survival of Hamas. This is the big problem the Israelis have with Biden's most recent deal, the one that was just enshrined in a Security Council resolution. The deal that is on the table does not, at the end of the day, mean the end of Hamas rule. What it says is ceasefire, return of prisoners, or return of hostages, and then everybody goes back to their corner. And that's of course
why I'm being doubtful that Hamas is going to be defeated because of exactly that. That's why I
at this point it's a test of wills between the U.S. and Israel. And as if you haven't, I think we can all see it. The Israelis are not agreeing to these terms. We
don't know what Hamas, as we record this on Wednesday, Hamas has said in terms of the deal being offered or the deal proposed by the UN Security Council, which was America's deal. It's not bad, but we have a few tweaks. And then what I'm hearing is that those tweaks are major tweaks. It's like, as long as we understand that at the end of the day, it's clear that Israel's defeated, we'll do it. We're not agreeing on hostages. We are saying the Israelis have to get the hell out of Gaza and let us come out of our tunnels, right? Correct. That's sort of where we are on Wednesday.
That is. But I'll just make one more point on this. The broader U.S. policy has been to ignore the true aggressors in this conflict, right? We've got Iran directing 5 or 6 different proxy groups from 6 different jurisdictions, right? Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Iran itself. We're not seeing condemnations. We're not seeing pressure in any of those places. And we're not seeing pressure on the Turks. We're not seeing pressure on the Qataris. We're not seeing pressure on the Egyptians. All of the enablers of this war, right, that is being waged against Israel, they're walking away scot-free. And that includes, right, Hamas. They're getting a free pass. There's only one country that is taking heat right now for the war that it didn't start, that it didn't want.
There's a monograph coming out from FDD titled "Turkey and Hamas." Have we already gone over what? It's not finished. I know what's in it, or are there other?
There's lots of juicy things in it. Yeah, okay. It's a sort of tripartite effort with John and myself here working on some parts of it, and our colleague Melissa Sachs, who I think is probably writing the more interesting parts of it, which is really exposing some of these actual networks that pertain to Hamas's financial roots inside of Turkey. And we should stress this here for our listeners simply because one of the most interesting things that makes Hamas and Turkey really sort of, valuable to listeners is if you look at what Hamas uses Turkey for, I would say primarily for fundraising. There are best estimates, hundreds and millions of dollars that move through the financial system in the world by sympathizers to Hamas's cause who want to give money to it, right? But can't do so because of financial restrictions and sanctions upon sort of Hamas entities across the world. But one place seems to be Turkey. Turkish banks like Kuwait Turk, right? Major companies, that are on the Turkish stock exchange, like a holding company called Trend GYO, which is basically run by Hamas, right?
And by the way, even though after it's been designated by the U.S., the Turkish government has not shut it down.
No, absolutely not. And its net worth is close to $1 billion, if not more. And we see millions of dollars move through Turkey's financial banks, crypto, digital wallet exchanges, currency exchange outfits, quote-unquote charities, which then finds its way into the operating accounts of Hamas in Gaza. And Turkey's thought to be the main financial sort of hub where Hamas in Gaza appropriates its funds from. That's what makes Turkey really unique in this situation. And I should also add, when you said this sort of the Shalit deal, I looked at those times, about 1,000 sort of prisoners, Hamas prisoners released from Israeli jails that were then subsequently deported and split amongst 4 countries. It's interesting that Turkey got literally about 10 to 11 of them, as opposed to other sort of Egypt and other countries, which got the lion's share. But out of that 10 or 11, what you see is the most notorious Hamas actors that have really laid deep roots inside of the country, which then has organic roots with the Turkish government right now. And that, to me, is the most troubling aspect of it.
there's another part of this which I have found fascinating as we have watched the chaos erupt on campus here in the U.S. What we've actually seen is that there are significant links going back to Turkey from the chaos that we see here. There's a group that, of course, you're no doubt familiar with, AMP, American Muslims for Palestine. We've seen a number of their people operating out of Turkey. Their leadership travels there actually quite often. There are photos of the executive director of AMP meeting with Erdogan at the presidential palace in Ankara, photos of the rest of the team meeting with the ambassador here in Washington. The ties are actually quite deep with the government, which to me has yet to be explained fully. No one's actually been able to explain this. And then there's something else. The same guys from AMP that we've been watching over the years have been attending events under the banner of a group called SIGA, the Center for Islam and Global Affairs. This is an organization that is based in a university in Istanbul, and it's led by a guy named Sami al-Arian. Sami al-Arian is the former Palestinian Islamic Jihad financier who was ultimately jailed and then deported from the U.S. to Turkey. He's been meeting with them. Al-Arian tweeted recently that his wife was at the Columbia University encampment.
Sitting outside one of those little tents.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And then just a strange postscript to all of this. No doubt everybody's been following this strange story about the Palestine Chronicle.
Yes.
That one of the reporters or journalists that was associated with this outlet, let's call it. I don't know if we can call it a newspaper, but a website. That
in the U.S., a C3 in the U.S.
Correct. Registered in Washington State as a C3, that the journalist or one of the journalists was actually involved in holding hostages. And so
that were just released.
Yeah, well, it turns out
freed, I should
right.
say.
Turns out that this one journalist worked for Sami al-Arian's organization, was a non-resident fellow. So there's a lot of weird connections bringing us back to Turkey. It's not just a jurisdiction for illicit finance for Hamas. There appears to be some weird overlap with the activists that are here as well, and even some militants back in Gaza. So really a strange witch's brew that we're tracking right now.
There's another dozen topics we could discuss today. I'm cognizant of time. I've got I'm short on time. Is there another topic that any of you want to make sure we talk about for a moment or two here today?
No, this is pretty good.
We covered the most of the bases.
Well, I mean, actually, I think Tyler may have some insight into this Hulk Bank.
Yeah.
That's something that's coming due. Actually, there's a couple of court cases. There's the other one about when Erdogan's bodyguards beat the heck out of some protesters at DuPont Circle. That was back in 2016?
2017,
right? And then there's the Hulk Bank case, where this is the second largest state-owned bank that was involved in the massive scheme that where Turkey was helping Iran evade sanctions. Both of those are actually still kind of right in front of us right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be that we've had successive administrations that haven't wanted to finish the case against Hulk Bank in terms of bringing the charges to DOJ and having them go through a trial with them. But I think that the financial institutions that were named in the sanctions produced yesterday by Treasury and State Department, some of those may have links to Hulk Bank. They may I think the Russian sanctions that were published will also start to have secondary sanctions implications for Turkish financial institutions. So Hulk Bank's one of the larger fish. I think we're looking at some of these smaller fish that will be caught up in some of Putin's war crimes.
Well, Tyler, John, Sinan, great. It's wonderful to talk to you guys around the microphones. I learn a lot more than I do around the coffee machine. We get to actually have a discussion. And I'm glad all of you who have just joined us for this discussion as well, here today on Foreign Policy.